In this small downtown apartment, the rain seemed to want to drown out the outside world, its drops hitting the window with an almost hypnotic regularity. Samuel Delacroix, a man in his 50s, his features drawn by the years, stood there, motionless, as if each drop of rain amplified the heaviness of his thoughts. His eyes, once full of ambition and energy, were now tired, witness to years of hard work and personal sacrifice. He had climbed the ladder of success at a time when every decision seemed to be a step closer to greatness. But today, the dim light that bathed the room, rather than warming his heart, highlighted his growing isolation. Samuel was not just a former executive in a large company. He had been a builder, a man of projects, a devoted father and husband. But those years now seemed to belong to another man. After losing his wife in a brutal accident several years ago, he had to make difficult decisions to keep his family together, raising his children alone while juggling his career. It wasn't easy, but he did it. Today, he found himself at the head of a small company that he had founded after his resignation, thinking he could realize his dream of working more independently, of freeing himself from the chains of large companies. But the illusion of freedom was short-lived. The market had changed, competition had become fierce, and once enthusiastic investors had moved away. Bills were piling up, cash flow was at rock bottom, and there were no obvious solutions in sight. The scene he found himself in now, staring at the rain, seemed to symbolize the slow agony of his hopes. Everything he had built was in danger of collapsing, and the idea that his lifelong efforts could amount to inevitable failure began to sink in. It was not fear that paralyzed him, but loneliness. The loneliness of a man who realized that he had given everything for his success, to the detriment of his own dreams and his personal relationships. He was no longer the flamboyant business leader he had been, but a man overwhelmed by responsibilities that he no longer knew how to shoulder. It was then that a noise at the door brought him out of his thoughts. A small, discreet, almost shy tap, like a distant echo of a time when its doors were constantly open to friends, partners, and opportunities. Curious, he slowly stood up, his joints creaking slightly under the weight of age and accumulated stress. Who could have knocked at that hour? And why would someone come to disturb his peace, if not to remind him even more of his failure? Opening the door, he faced a young man he had never seen before. The boy, barely in his 20s, wore a plain wool coat, but his gaze was that of a man who seemed to have already carried weights much heavier than his age would suggest. This determined look, these frank and open eyes, struck Samuel hard. "Hello, Mr. Delacroix. I am Pierre, the son of your former colleague, Claire. She spoke to me about you several times." The words echoed in the air, but they didn't immediately find their place in Samuel's mind. Pierre. Claire. He remembered Claire, vaguely. A brilliant, discreet woman, who had left the company a few years ago. They hadn't had much contact after he left, but he had always had a lot of respect for her. His departure had left a void in the team, and he remembered that many had missed it. But Pierre. This name meant nothing to him. His young face, his features still marked by the innocence of youth, contrasted so much with the state in which Samuel found himself today. Clear. It's a surprise. But what do you want from me? Samuel asked, a slight worry piercing his voice. Curiosity, although present, did not succeed in erasing the veil of distrust that he had worn for months. Every detail, every gesture, every word now seemed tinged with suspicion in this period of his life. He never liked to be surprised, and the appearance of a young stranger at this late hour added a new layer of uncertainty to his already turbulent world. Pierre did not let himself be destabilized, his persistent gaze exuding a confidence that contrasted strangely with his age. He knew he had to strike the right note, and that his introduction of Claire, a name that still held an echo of respect in Samuel's mind, was a potential key to opening this still half-closed door. "I know you are going through a difficult time. My mother told me about your business and your difficulties. She also told me about you, your integrity, your hard work. But she also said that you never asked anyone for help." Peter's words fell like a gentle breeze, but Samuel felt them like stones thrown into a still lake. A shiver ran through his body, but he had no immediate reaction. It was the truth. All his life he had avoided asking for help, believing that a man worthy of the name should be able to overcome his trials on his own. He had seen his father struggle alone against difficulties, his colleagues wallow in opportunism, and his wife sacrifice herself without ever expecting anything in return. Samuel had absorbed this worldview, this idea that personal pride was the last defense against failure. Asking for help was not in his habits, nor in his character. Pierre, with a calm that seemed anachronistic in a young man of his age, entered the living room without hesitation, went to the coffee table and placed a file that he had carefully wrapped. The gesture was precise, methodical, as if this moment had been anticipated for a long time. "I am not here to ask you personal questions, Mr. Delacroix. I'm here because I think I have a solution to your problem." Samuel sat up straight on his couch, a glimmer of interest piercing through his reserve. A hint of skepticism still hung in the air, but the young man's insistence and the mention of a solution aroused in him a curiosity that he could no longer ignore. "A solution?" Samuel repeated, his voice marked by a caution that he could not hide. The young man, apparently determined, was not waiting for permission. He was already launched into his explanation, and Samuel could only listen to him, his fingers clenched around the armrests. Pierre sat down opposite him, and without further ado, began to present his analysis. "You focused on good short-term results, on immediate profitability, but you neglected a crucial detail: the long-term vision." Pierre paused, watching Samuel, measuring each word before continuing, as if each syllable was of capital importance. "What you see before your eyes is not just a company in difficulty. It is a brand that has value, a history, invaluable human resources. And these things you can't lose." Samuel listened attentively, although distrust continued to fill him. He wasn't one to make hasty decisions, and yet something about the way Pierre spoke seemed to truly captivate his mind. The phrase, "a valuable brand," made him wince. He hadn't thought like that in a long time. In his moments of despair, he had reduced his company to a simple suffering entity, a weight he could no longer carry. But hearing these words, spoken with this quiet assurance, awakened something in him, a memory perhaps of the days when he still believed in the future of his company. Pierre continued, his eyes shining with a conviction that he probably did not have the luxury of maintaining at his age. "I analyzed your company and its flows. I also saw what your competitors didn't see. There is an untapped market that you can dominate if you apply a different approach. You need to adjust your priorities." With one smooth motion, he pulled out several graphs and detailed business plans. The documents were impressively precise, and Samuel suddenly felt small in the face of the mastery of numbers and strategies spread out before him. This young man, this stranger, knew his business better than some of his former partners. Each graph seemed to link elements he had overlooked, each diagram a revelation. Samuel turned the pages, scrutinizing the figures, trying to understand how such an analysis could come from someone so young. There was data he had ignored, flaws his own eyes had not seen. Pierre had charted a path, a new perspective that he had never considered. How could a young man, barely an adult, have such an understanding of the workings of his business, its challenges and its opportunities? Pierre continued, his eyes shining with an almost palpable ambition, and his voice took on a more confident tone, as if he had already seen victory looming before him. "The key is innovation. It is no longer enough to simply offer what everyone else is offering. You have to create something new, something different. A completely new customer experience, with cutting-edge technology that no one has yet exploited in your field. You have enormous potential, but you have to be bold." Pierre's words rang in Samuel's mind like a bell struck by a profound but almost unrealizable truth. The idea of innovating, of breaking the chains of heritage and tradition that had piled up around his company, seemed like a leap into the unknown. It was risky, almost insane. But, on the other hand, he had nothing left to lose. His company was in free fall, and he was left with only crumbs of former glory trying to put it back together. The foundations of his empire were cracking with each passing month without a solution, and his employees were beginning to doubt. Maybe Pierre was right. Maybe it was the last chance. Maybe he had no choice. A whirlwind of thoughts swirled through Samuel's head, but he managed to contain them and placed Pierre's files on the table, looking at them intently before looking up at the man sitting in front of him. He stared at Pierre, a glint of challenge in his eyes. You want me to take risks with my business, but I can't just abandon what I've built, or put the future of my employees at risk. Pierre did not let himself be discouraged. He stood up slowly, as if he had anticipated this resistance. He walked towards the window, his gaze lost in the dim light outside. You don't give up. You reinvent yourself. You're not fighting just to save your business. You fight to give your employees a reason to believe in it again. You are fighting for the future. It's a gamble, yes. But it's a bet on innovation and vision, not luck. Samuel looked at him for a moment, absorbing his words. The magnitude of what he was proposing was slowly sinking into his mind. He knew deep down that the days where he could just go with the flow were over. If Pierre was right, then the company was not simply a structure to be saved, but a concept to be transformed. But the question remained, did he have enough courage to cross this threshold, to risk losing everything in the name of this vision? The two men remained silent for a long time, the sound of the rain beating against the window bringing a strange serenity to this atmosphere heavy with decisions to come. Samuel turned the file in his hands, his fingers gripping the leather bindings with a force that betrayed his inner turmoil. He realized that he had never been so ready to do anything to avoid failure, but he also knew that such a radical decision had to be carefully considered. After a long silence, Samuel sighed, a deep resignation being heard in the breath that followed. All right. I'll give you a chance. But it has to be solid. No room for failure. The words came out slowly, like a pact, a promise. He knew that if he took this path, there would be no turning back. But it was also a point of no return, an opportunity he could not ignore. Pierre smiled, an expression of relief and determination marking his face. You won't regret it. He held out his hand, and Samuel took it firmly, as if they were sealing a deal that would change their respective futures. In the months that followed, Samuel embarked on a series of bold innovations that Pierre had proposed to him, while remaining faithful to his principles of quality and service. It wasn't easy. Every day brought its share of doubts, fears, and uncertainties. Employees remained skeptical. Customers were hesitant. The unknown was vast, and even the first steps of this new path were fraught with pitfalls. But little by little, the results began to appear. Customers, initially hesitant, were attracted by the novelty of the offer, by the promise of a radically different experience. Former investors began to come forward, curious to see this rebirth of the company. The first successes were timid, but undeniable. Each small gain became another signal that the bet was viable. Samuel, who was used to fighting alone, understood that he was no longer simply saving a company, but redefining what it stood for. He began to understand that true innovation was not only technological, but also mental, in the way he approached business and its human relations. A year later, Samuel's business was not only saved, it was thriving like never before. Pierre, who knew how to see opportunity where others only saw obstacles, had become Samuel's right arm, a constant source of fresh ideas and new energy. They were now partners in this adventure, and Samuel knew that without Pierre, he would never have been able to reinvent his business with such audacity. Their relationship was based on trust, common initiative, and above all, a shared vision of an ambitious future. Samuel now looked back and smiled. He had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes you don't have to fight alone. Sometimes success lies in the ability to listen, take risks, and above all, surround yourself with the right people. But above all, he discovered that it was never too late to reinvent your destiny. Thus, from the pouring rain at the beginning of the story to the bright light of the future, Samuel had found not only the last chance he was waiting for, but also the greatest of all, that of believing in a future he had not yet imagined. It was a future he would never have imagined alone. But with Pierre, the future seemed promising, and innovation, far from being a simple word, had become their common driving force.